Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining Two-Way. I'm at the Lancaster Airport in Pennsylvania. I just walked away from the ending of a Trump rally that included a lot of stuff, but it also included two clear but oblique references to Ann Selzer, who's joining us today to talk about her Iowa poll. The president and many of his supporters are no fan of this poll. Let me set the baseline for a few things. Ann is one of the best pollsters in America. Some consider her the best. I've worked with her in the past. Nothing Ann does in her polling is about psyops or partisanship or attempts to influence the debate. And the fact is, President Trump referred to it, a poll came out right before the election. Yeah, polls come out right before the election because that's what people like Ann measure. Ann polls all over the place, but she's best known for her work in Iowa, where she lives. She does the Iowa poll for the Des Moines Registers and others. And Ann has a well-deserved reputation for being able to do great polls. Now, the best pollsters in the world, because the nature of polling, sometimes their polls come out bad. That's just the nature of polling. Not every great pollster gets it right every time. So maybe I will be really close, and Ann will once again be heralded as a magically great pollster with rigorous methodology. Maybe she'll be wrong. Maybe this poll will not be accurate. Ann's polls, like all polls, they're not predictions. They're snapshots in time. This is a snapshot right before the election. But just because a poll ends up being wrong in the sense that it doesn't match the election results, doesn't mean that Ann engaged in psyops or is a bad pollster. Some polls just end up being off. That's the nature of beast. Like 1 in 20 are just off. Now, what we're going to talk about with Ann, who's been generous enough to join us, is what the poll shows, her methodology. Not all pollsters do things the same way. And Ann's type of polling is now distinct from a lot of other polls. Ann and I happen to agree that her methodology is actually the best, but other people differ from that. So we're going to talk to Ann about how she did the poll, what it showed. If you don't know, and most of you I'm sure do, this poll has set the world on fire. Why does it matter? Iowa's not a battleground state. Other polls, including one done in the last couple of days, so what most people had assumed, which was President Trump, who won Iowa, I believe, by 8 4 years ago, would win by roughly the same. So why does it matter? It matters because the people on the right who don't like Ann's poll are saying this is part of a psyops. So we need to address that. But it matters because if Ann's result is close to reality, what some people believe is that, well, what does that mean for Wisconsin? What does that mean for some of the groups who are where the vice president's doing very well with an Ann's poll? What does that mean about how they may vote in other states, not just Wisconsin? That may lead to a more favorable result for the vice president than the overall polling suggests. Ann's poll is an outlier in the sense that it shows Kamala Harris doing really well in a red state. We don't have very many of those. There's some. There's some polls that have shown her doing well in Texas, for instance. But this is an outlier in that respect. And the question for people is this on the leading edge of where things are headed at the end of the election? Or is it an outlier? And Ann would be the first to tell you, not all polls turn out to be accurate, even by the best pollsters. So grateful to you for joining, whether you're watching on YouTube or here on Two-Way. If you're going to play in the chat, as always, peace, love, and understanding, the presumption of grace, even though President Trump did not seem to be extending the presumption to Ann in his speech just now here in Lancaster, you should all extend it to Ann. Ann is, again, one of the best professionals I know that I've worked with in any profession, but she's one of the best pollsters in the country and a very nice person. So we're all going to be very polite to Ann, even in the chat. I'll say again, she's not engaged in a conspiracy. She's not trying to hurt Donald Trump. She's not engaged in psyops. She did the poll at the behest of a client, and she did it with her normal professionalism. So, Ann, welcome in.
Thank you.
Let's show the poll results for those of you who haven't seen it. It shows Vice President Harris up by 3, and Ann's previous poll showed the race closer than most polls, but not with the vice president ahead. So, Ann, your phone exploded and your email inbox exploded more than mine did. But this has been the talk of the political world since last night. Just walk people through how you poll. What's your methodology? Do you use live phone calls? How do you determine who to poll? Just walk through people this in this poll, but in general, how you do it.
Yeah. Thank you, Mark. This is the same methodology that I have had in place going back before 2008. So it's been tested any number of times. We do live interviews, and we do both a sample of landlines and a sample of cell phones and try to get that balanced out. What we do that is a little different is what I want to do is to be in a position to be out of the way of my data revealing to me what the future electorate looks like. So you'll hear some pollsters saying, well, the only trick is figuring out what the future electorate is going to look like and making those assumptions. I don't assume. So the way that I do that is to get a cross section of all Iowa adults, random digit dialing, both cell phones and landlines. And the first question we ask, among the first, is the determination of whether they qualify as a likely voter. So they either tell us they've already voted. If that isn't likely, I don't know what is. Or they say they will definitely vote. If they say probably vote, that's not strong enough for us. So we only take you if you are yet to vote and it's in the future, or you've already voted. If you don't pass that screen, we still collect some basic demographics. So age and sex, what county you live in, so we can do geography, race, other things, but only a handful of those. Now, we talked to 1,038 Iowans, okay? And we weight that to look like the entire state of Iowa. And within that group, there were 808 who qualified as a likely voter. So we just pull them out. And that way, if you're more likely to vote, if your demographic is more likely to vote, you show up in more plentiful numbers in our sample. And if you're less likely to vote, you show up in less plentiful numbers. So our cross section of likely voters doesn't match the state, and it doesn't match anything. So we don't weight according to who we think is likely to vote. So it's simple in a way, but in some ways it's not what most other pollsters are doing.
Right. So, for instance, let's say, and if you know the real stat, tell me, in 2020, what percentage of the general election electorate was Republican, according to the exit polls? Do you know?
According to the, no, I don't have
Okay.
that.
So
Sorry.
let's say it was 54%. Okay, let's just say. If you did your poll and you got your universal people and it showed that the makeup of the electorate was 54% Democrats, you would just say, well, maybe that's going to be the makeup this time for various reasons. You wouldn't say we got to poll some more Republicans, right?
Right. Right.
Okay.
The thing,
Whereas other polls, some other pollsters would, they would say we need to look at the recent makeup of the electorate and poll until we get that according to party
right,
registration, age, gender, everything, right?
right. I call that idea that they need to look at things that have happened before, polling backward.
Right.
So they are counting that the future electorate looks like the past electorate, and I don't make that assumption. I
Okay.
call what
So
I
there's
do
been,
polling
yeah,
forward, that I
right,
keep my dirty fingers off the data, and hopefully the data reveals to me an accurate cross section of the future
right.
electorate.
So let me give you a hypothetical. Let's say you knew that in 2020 the makeup was 54% Republicans, and you got back 75% of the electorate was Democrats. Would you still go forward with the poll, knowing that it couldn't possibly be 75% Democrat?
Well, it's hard to say what I would do in that circumstance because I've never been in that circumstance.
Yeah.
Do we see things in our data from time to time that cause us to dig deeper to see if we have an explanation for it? Absolutely. And did we do that on this poll? Absolutely. But at the end of the day, we want to be satisfied that we understand the data as they are. And it is unthinkable to me that I would go back in and, as I say, put my dirty fingers on the data so that it reflects more Ann Selzer than it does the Iowa electorate.
Right. So you've received and seen, as I have, criticism for the poll. People, it's a question of methodology, including the Trump campaign and a memo from their polling team, including a lot online. Have you read or heard any criticism of your poll that you look at and you say, yeah, that's a valid criticism?
No,
No. Okay.
I've
Let's,
I've
yeah,
I've
go ahead.
had things that just make me laugh. like I
Okay.
must be getting paid by
Right.
somebody. That this is propaganda. And I go, how would
Right.
that work
Right.
exactly?
So, but leaving aside the conspiracy theories and the ad
Yeah,
hominem attacks,
yeah.
has anybody said a thing about your methodology that's made you say, well, I see their point, or that's a good argument. I don't agree with it, but that's a good argument.
What I say is, even I look at my methodology and say, it's too simple, it can't possibly work.
Right.
Yet it has. So maybe one day it will
Yeah.
not work and I'll blow up and little sprinkles of Selzer will cross the city of Des Moines. But it has worked so successfully for so long. I do understand that people think it can't possibly work. And should I be doing maybe some things with text to web, maybe I do that next time. But we're getting enough of the demographics that we need. Are the weights that we ended up applying were actually quite as kind of astonishingly small. So if we're not having to make much adjustment, it means we're getting a pretty good cross sections of all Iowans. We're not
Right.
having weighting an individual responded up 3, 4, 5 times
Right.
to balance out.
But just to clarify, you just said, as you said a little earlier, that you do some weighting.
Yes.
How does your weighting differ from the weighting that other pollsters do, where they go for what they consider to be the quote unquote correct percentages of representation?
I go for the correct percentages at a statewide level. So we know from the census what the distribution of age is within each congressional district, for example. We know what male-female ratio is supposed to be. Sometimes we don't need to use all of those to get an accurate cross-section of the whole state.
Right.
So what I don't know is how in the world we would weight just likely voters without that. So as I said, we got more than 1,000 people we talked to, make it represent the state. Now we just extract those who meet our likely voter criterion.
Right.
And then we trust in that distribution. And do they look different from the last time? Yeah, because the dynamics election to election change.
Right.
And
Okay. We're gonna go to. Sorry. Finish up the thought. I apologize.
well, it just how in the world there's a little bit of gumption maybe, and or that's a nice word for it, of people who say they know better than what their data can show them about what this future electorate looks like.
Right. Okay. Couple more questions for me. Then my colleague Noah is going to bring in questions from you also. If you're here on the two-way platform, you want to get a question, and please raise your hand. So your poll is showing a different kind of result, different than other public polls of Iowa, and again, different in the crosstabs from other polls. It's given that it's a state Donald Trump won by 8 last time. It is an outlier in that respect. How would you explain what would account for that?
So what accounts for that, and we saw this in our September poll very clearly. Our June poll, when Joe Biden was on the ticket, Donald Trump had an 18-point advantage. That dropped to a 4-point advantage. So the margin was narrowed by 14 points. And somebody asked me, well, did Donald Trump lose ground? Is that what you're saying? I go, okay, that's a very interesting question. And I got out my calculator and figured out that, in fact, we had 88 more respondents in our likely voter pool. Those are weighted respondents for the geeks in the crowd. And Donald Trump had 3 more than he had in June. So he didn't lose ground. It's that we had more people who qualified as a likely voter in September, and 85 of those weighted bodies went for Kamala Harris. So that's a pretty dynamic change. The demographics we could see separately of the people who qualified compared to June, women, college educated, younger people, all demographics that were more likely than average to support Kamala Harris. So that's how I explain that. And it's really pretty much the same thing here.
Okay, go ahead and put up the tweet. There were lots of tweets criticizing the methodology, and put up the Ryan tweet. Most of them say the crosstabs of the polling reflect a makeup of the electorate, which is not going to be the makeup of the Iowa electorate. Looking at 22, and 20. Noah, are you able to put that up?
I'd like to know who
Yeah,
thought they were looking
we
at the
got it.
crosstabs.
Tabs. I shouldn't say the crosstabs because explain to people why you don't make the crosstabs available.
Um, this goes way back into Des Moines Register history preceding me, that at one point they were requested, I think in the 1984 caucuses, the first time caucuses were ever pulled. And so they said, sure, and they shipped it off to a pollster who then wrote an op-ed in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or perhaps the Washington Post saying, this is why the Des Moines Register is so completely wrong. And they decided that if anybody's going to write the next story about the poll, they reserve the right to reveal the data.
Right.
So,
Right. Okay. So Noah, are you able to put up that tweet? Maybe it's up and I can't see it because
It's
I'm on
up.
my. It's up. All right. Ann, are you able to see that?
yes.
Okay. Could you just go through and say what you think about those criticisms?
Well, I'm trying, this is in a format that's a little difficult for me to see. What does this D represent and the R represent?
So they're saying that, and again, he says read through the Seltzer crosstabs.
Yeah.
So right, they're saying that they know that this poll shows, and again, it's they say your sample is got it's more 3% more Democrats than Republican, whereas the electorate last time was eight
Oh, I
percent more
see.
Republican. It says that you have Indies voting Democrat +4, whereas last time they
Yeah.
voted for +7, +4. So
Yeah.
they're saying if you compare what you have with what happened in 20, according to the exit polls, it's way too big a change across all these groups in a uniform way towards pro Harris as opposed to Trump.
Yeah. Well, this is the first time I'm seeing this, and so it's sort of against my nature to think I understand everything that this is saying, and I haven't cross-checked these numbers to know how that actually pans
Yeah.
out. But I'm going to say that it is clear that senior women are an advantage to Kamala Harris in our poll. Kamala Harris wins by more than 2 to 1, actually, maybe even more than that among senior women. It's a big, big spread. So I don't know. I do. I mean, the truth of it all is I don't go back to the previous exit polls to see how my data align with that
Yeah.
because it doesn't matter. I expect there to be dynamism in how the electorate forms itself from poll to poll, from
So
cycle to cycle.
right. So what people are skeptical about is they say
Yeah,
the sample you came up with in all these areas just
yeah,
is too large a shift that's not reflected in other state polling
yeah.
towards
Okay.
Harris. And so again, you would say that your record suggests that when you do poll with your methodology, you get a good reflection of the electorate. And if these changes occurred, it means these changes occurred from one cycle to another, right?
Yes, I have been looking at seniors all the way through this cycle because they have historically been more likely to vote for the Republican candidate. So I've had my eye on them this whole time. Well, so that's a big number, it's saying, for senior women voting for a Democrat, if that's what that means. Um, it, 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 it is showing up in my data. It
Right.
is showing up that that's the biggest margin Kamala Harris has.
Right.
But,
So
and
last,
especially
yeah,
because seniors didn't necessarily vote for Democrats in the past.
right. So last question is, as a polling expert,
Yeah.
is it legitimate to extrapolate from your poll to say if these groups have shifted as a makeup of the electorate and in their support for the Democrat, that you could say this is a harbinger for what might happen in Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, maybe other states, or
Yeah.
is that you wouldn't make that leap?
I understand others want to make that leap. As I've said on your show before, there are differences between Iowa and Wisconsin that are make things about voter turnout, for example, different. How red is Iowa compared to Wisconsin? It's far more red. There's only one statewide officer who is a Democrat, at the statewide level. There's nobody in the Washington delegation who's a Democrat, and both houses of our state house are controlled and by large margins by Republicans. So there's been a lot of work to make that happen, and
But
that work
but
is still in place.
couldn't we extrapolate from what you just said, arguably, that if Harris is leading in a legitimate poll in a red state like Iowa, she's probably going to win a blue state like Michigan.
I would allow others to make that claim and not refute it. How's
Yeah.
that? But I don't know.
Okay, good. All right. No, okay. And thank you. A great explanation. Again, I'll say Anne is not involved in psyops. She's not involved in a conspiracy. She's not trying to hurt Donald Trump. She's not trying to create momentum. She's simply doing a poll using her normal methodology, which has been very effective and accurate over a long period of time, not as a prediction, but as a snapshot of the electorate close to election day, which matches up with what actually happens much more often than not.